It was dusk when I arrived at the small village nestled between shadowed mountains and dense forests. The place was so isolated it felt like a forgotten corner of the world. I had come here to explore local myths and, as always, chase the thrill of discovering the unknown. Little did I know, this adventure would bring me face to face with a horror I could never escape. As I strolled through the village, I noticed everyone avoided looking directly at me, and some even made strange hand gestures, as if to ward off a curse. I was intrigued. Later that evening, in the village inn, the innkeeper spoke to me in hushed tones about a legend, the cursed flowers of the graveyard. As I pressed the innkeeper for more details, he hesitated, glancing over his shoulder before speaking again. The graveyard at the edge of the forest, he whispered, is home to flowers that are said to grow only where souls cannot find peace. According to him, the flowers only bloomed at midnight, and anyone who dared to pick them would suffer a fate worse than death. Tales told of villagers who disappeared or went mad after taking a flower home. Despite the warning, my curiosity had been piqued. I decided to see the graveyard with my own eyes. The night was dark and silent as I made my way toward the graveyard. A chilling wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decay. I pushed open the rusty iron gate and stepped inside. The place was exactly as described, cold, dark, and strangely silent. It was as if the very air refused to carry sound. I scanned the ground and spotted them, a cluster of white, almost glowing flowers near an old, broken gravestone. They seemed innocent enough, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I reached for my flashlight and aimed it at the flowers, half expecting them to vanish. But they remained, almost defiant. Then, as I moved closer, I heard a faint rustling sound behind me. I froze and turned around, shining my flashlight over the graves, but saw nothing. Just as I relaxed, I caught sight of a shadow, a figure standing far off, watching me. Its shape was faint but unmistakably human. My heart pounded as I stared at it, paralyzed by fear. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. I was alone, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Shaken but determined, I approached the flowers again, bending down to examine them. I hesitated to touch them, remembering the innkeeper's warning. Still, the flowers held a strange beauty, and in that moment, I couldn't resist. My fingers brushed one of the petals, and the temperature around me seemed to plummet instantly. It was then that I noticed something even more horrifying. The flowers were growing from the skeletal remains of a hand emerging from the soil. I gasped and stumbled back, heart racing, as the realization hit me. The flowers were feeding on the dead. Panicked, I turned to leave the graveyard, but the gate slammed shut behind me. The wind had picked up, carrying with it strange whispers. At first, they were faint, barely audible, but then they grew louder, like voices calling out to me. "Why did you come here?" a voice whispered, barely audible yet chilling. The fear in my chest twisted into a sharp pang of terror. I sprinted toward the gate, trying to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. Desperate, I looked around, and my flashlight flickered weakly in my hand. Shadows began gathering around me, drifting closer and closer. Their faces were pale, hollow, and filled with anguish. It dawned on me then, these were the spirits of those who could not find peace. They had been drawn to the flowers, or perhaps trapped by them, forever bound to this cursed place. My body froze in fear as the spirits reached out, their hands stretching toward me, their whispers filling my mind. Each word felt like a knife carving into my thoughts, unraveling my sense of reality. One spirit, a woman with hollow eyes, pointed at the flowers. "They bind us here," she murmured. Her words were almost drowned by the wind, but I understood. These flowers, fed by the dead, were more than just cursed, they held the spirits captive. I backed away slowly, but the spirits seemed to grow more agitated. It was as if my presence disturbed their fragile existence. I understood the horror of the curse. Anyone who touched the flowers was bound to this graveyard, forced to wander among the dead, unable to leave. Fueled by a surge of desperation, I lunged at the gate again, rattling it with all my strength. The whispers grew louder, their voices filled with sorrow and fury. I shouted, begging for release, pleading with the spirits. For a moment, silence fell, and I thought I might have escaped their wrath. But then, a single, guttural voice spoke directly into my ear, "You are one of us now." The weight of those words hit me with such force that I staggered, feeling as if my very soul was being pulled from my body. In a last, desperate attempt, I threw myself against the gate one more time, and to my surprise, it finally swung open. I stumbled out, gasping for air, feeling the world spin around me. I made it back to the inn, shaken and pale, only to find the innkeeper waiting for me. He shook his head knowingly. "You touched the flowers, didn't you?" he asked, his voice filled with a mixture of pity and fear. I nodded, unable to speak. "You will never truly leave this place," he said softly. "The flowers mark those who touch them. They will always find a way to call you back." And from that day on, I could feel it, the pull of the graveyard, whispering my name, waiting for me to return.